Ooh, this is Chapter 2, Lecture B. I'll hopefully get Chapter 2 done today. And we'll be able to move on to Chapter 3 next week. I know this is quicker and faster paced than I would like to normally go, but the beginning of the school year is a little bit of a rush for us all. So we'll get through this and hopefully I'll be able to remember everything. I took a volleyball to the head, which was not the most pleasant experience, but it was fine. Okay, the New England Way, number 1. The rise of Puritanism. New England was founded by a movement known as Puritanism. Puritans wanted to drastically reform the church, specifically the Church of England. Sermons and reading were critical elements, and sermons, when I mean that, they were more like hours of boredom. Sermons were all about the do's and don'ts, etc. Calvinist, word was divided amongst the damned and the elect. You either were going to heaven or you were going to hell, and it was predetermined. Now, moral liberty, zeal that alienated many had different religious views. Separatists settled in Plymouth. Those who had this really strict view, this zeal for this is how it is and no other way, are going to leave England because they had been more strict and they weren't Catholic again. They will try to escape the corruptions of English society. They'll establish the city on a hill mentality, or as they would call often the city of Zion. John Winthrop, 2 types of liberty, moral and natural, basically saying you're subject to authority, but there's a moral and a natural liberty that you have to deal with. Now, this going into the New England Way 2, this is going to deal directly with the Pilgrims at Plymouth. Pilgrims, yes, I put that in there because the Pilgrims are often go down to these cute little cartoons that first graders draw and wear their hats. Pilgrims are terrible. They're not really that good of people at times. They were the first Puritans to immigrate, were the separatists. They were known as Pilgrims. That's what we get. They fled to the Netherlands first and then to Plymouth because the Netherlands didn't want them either. They sailed on the Mount Mayflower with several non-Puritans, people that were not of the elect or citizens in their mind. The Mayflower Compact was just one of the first written documents about adult men chose to agree to obey just and equal laws and set up a settlement. Now, out of 81 people that could potentially have signed this, only 41 were deemed citizens or able to sign it. They all settled in an old Indian camp. Land was ready, and local Indians had to help them survive. They actually came to an area that they could probably live on, but half of them are going to die because, once again, going back to the notion that just because you have a colony doesn't mean you're going to instantly go and live. Diseases crept in. They didn't know how to feed each other. They didn't know the weather. Would exist as an independent colony until 1691. Once they do get established at the help of the Indians, they will stabilize. But this colony is not initially very big or very popular. It's not populous because it's hard to live there. Plus, it's got strict religious rules. People don't want to move there. Not to mention the Indians that help these Puritans/Pilgrims survive, they're going to get help because they're going to agree to go attack another Indian tribe and wipe them out. And then eventually, a couple years later, they're going to take that Indian tribe out to help them. So it's not a good feel story in the end. So, this will be overshadowed by Massachusetts Bay to the north later on that was a much more stable and economically founded colony area. But the point of this is the Pilgrims were not successful. They will struggle for years. They're not going to attract settlers, and it's going to take time for them to develop. Yep, here's the first Thanksgiving, whoop-dee. And I don't mean to be negative on it, but this is a part of the history that is so overshadowed or overemphasized with a lot of inaccuracies. Now, they did have a meal, harvest meal, that would commemorate the fall. They did have it with the Indians, and there is some good to it, but at the end, it's a horrible aftermath. Now, the Great Migration. This is New England Way 3. Charted in 1629, the Massachusetts Bay Company was founded to further the Puritan cause and turn a profit through trade of Indians. In 10 years, over 21,000 people immigrate, but then it stopped in 1642. Most were families, and the population grew at a good rate. Different than the southern part. Now, Plymouth is going to struggle. They will eventually merge into one colony, hence you get Massachusetts. But the Massachusetts Bay Company was far more successful than those original Puritans that came for religious freedom. The Puritan family, they centered on the Bible. Men led the household and women did have some rights. Government and society in Massachusetts organized in self-governing towns. Basically, the town hall was the law of the land. Required to have a school, own congregational church that people had to pay money to, taxes to support the church. This is one thing that is drastically different today. Today we do not pay taxes to support a church. In this period before the establishment of a national government, citizens paid money for the church and the school. And you couldn't avoid it. Harvard College was established in 1636, In 1634, they will elect people, deputies by free men. The principle of consent was central to Puritanism. However, not everyone was allowed to be a full church member where the power was held, going back to whether it was predetermined if you were the elect or the damned. New England Way Forward. Church and state in Puritan Massachusetts was not separate. It was one and the same. Hierarchical society in which class determined most everything. Inequality was considered an expression of God's will. If you were poor, that was God's intent. Ministers were barred from holding public office, but each town was expected to levy tax to support the church, and church policy dictated a lot of things that went in the town. They did not believe in religious toleration, though they came for religious freedom, at least those in Plymouth. Massachusetts Bay area, where the Massachusetts Bay Company was at, was far more open, but at the end of the day, they were Puritans as well, and they will, when they merge in this whole colony, it's much more strict than you're going to see in other parts of the colonies. Now, New England is divided. They're not going to stay unified for the whole period. They will divide. Modern ideals of individuals, privacy, and personal freedom would have struck them as odd, our modern way of thinking things. Roger Williams, from his own allowance of interpretation of the Bible, Puritan set up for splinters. He's going to be one of those that's going to be like, hey, listen, you guys are kind of crazy on some of your concepts here. Wanted to withdraw from the Church of England and separate church and state, saying we need to separate the two, and you guys are really oppressive. Now, people should be allowed to worship whatever religion they wanted, and he rejected Puritans were an elect group of a divine mission. This is where you're going to get the product of Rhode Island and Connecticut born, because Roger Williams would be kicked out. Williams was banished from Massachusetts in 1636. He's obviously disagreed of the whole hierarchical structure. He's saying that you are not divinely elect, and all this is obviously not going to set well with the establishment. He will move and found Rhode Island. There it will be a haven of dissenters, Protestants who belong to denominations other than the established church, or the congregational church as it was known at the time. More democratic. Now, they're not going to necessarily be as tolerant as today would be, but they were definitely more tolerant than the Massachusetts area was. Thomas Hooker also left Massachusetts and started Hartford, Connecticut, later united with New Haven, and that will be what we think of Connecticut. Okay? So, the Massachusetts area becomes a very religious, strict area. They say they're religious tolerant, but it boils down to if you only tolerant if you believe their version. Roger Williams is the first to move, creates Rhode Island, and then Thomas Hooker later on creates the Connecticut. It's all in that New England little corridor right there, but you can see that there is division there. Now, the trial of Anne Hutchinson. Now, Anne Hutchinson is a woman on top of that, and she disagrees with those traditions. She was a threat because of her gender and her fiery way. She was a passionate woman. She was a woman on a mission, and this is not accustomed to this period for a woman to be fiery and on a mission like this. She believed salvation was God's direct gift to the elect, but also believed it could be not earned by good works practices or human effort. So she was a little bit different, a little bit fiery, and she was very, very set in her ways. She charged that all ministers were guilty of fallacy, meaning that ministers are not perfect. She claimed God directly spoke to her, which if you start saying God's speaking in my head, you might be considered a witch or other demon possessed or whatever, and they might burn you at the stake. Either case, she will be banished. Now, Puritans and the Indians. Roger Williams believed Indians should be treated fairly, purchased their land legally, and gave them money. John Winthrop did not. Another person in those areas. It was not cultivated land, so it was uncultivated, so they're saying if it's not cultivated or been worked, it's no one's land. Viewed as natural liberty, Indians were savagery, and they basically were temptation. Published captivity narratives, goal to show people wanted to return to Christian society, saying, hey, look, what's going on here? Basically, he basically said the Indians were uncivilized, they were of the devil, and that their land should be taken and be used for righteous purposes, meaning I'll take it, I'll do it. Now, there's a painting or drawing of Anne Hutchinson. New England's divided three. The Pequot War. Indians lacked strong leaders in the area. In 1637, Pequot tribe killed a fur trader. This will set off an outrage in the area. Force of Connecticut, Massachusetts soldiers, augmented by Narragansett allies approached a Pequot settlement on the Mystic River and destroyed it, slaughtered it completely, utter destruction. The Pequot Indian group were completely wiped out. So you can see here, Indian relations is going to be very, very bad. They're not just going to push Indians away, they're going to end up, killing them. In this case, they wipe out a whole tribe. Now, the New England economy prided itself on hard work and the idea of primary motivation for immigration as religion. They also came to an economic advancement and improvement. So some of these Puritans that did come were coming for economic gain. Once again, religious freedom, yes, was a motivation, but the reality was most people came for a new start. They needed economic freedom, and this was their chance, and they wanted to move up. They will start to focus on fishing and timber exports. They'll find that there is a market for that. Going to New England divided for a growing commercial society. Capital wealth lagged far behind that of the Chesapeake area and eventually the Carolinas, but there was far more equally wealth distributed, meaning there was not like super rich, super poor like there would be in the Virginia and the Carolinas later on. Most of the indentured servants never became full members of the church and became disenfranchised wage earners, meaning they just worked the land and they got paid low wages. Became a strong trade center for the British Empire. Boston will emerge with its natural harbor. Eventually evolved into a merchant-dominated colonial government. Now, what that means is they're going to be traders because they can't grow anything. They're not economically sound, but when they start trading stuff, fishing, selling items, that's when this colony will finally start to be prosperous. Some Puritan leaders tried to combine the changes by 1650, and less than half were full church members. They're going to come up with in 1662 what's called the Halfway Covenant. Obviously, if you have the damned and the elect group, society's not going to really prosper or grow a lot, is it? So what happens here is they do the Halfway Covenant, tried allowing for the baptism for grandchildren for those who immigrated during the Great Migration, church membership, basically to grow their membership, but it still was stagnant. People were fleeing this church. They didn't want to stay part of it for obvious reasons. By the 1600s and 1670s, or 1660s, 1670s, ministers were regularly attacking the changes. So they are trying to change. As more money comes in, people are going to move away from the established church and want to be more liberal. I mean, not by today's liberal standards, but they're going to be economically minded. Religion, politics, and freedom. The rise of Englishmen, the rights of the Englishman, the Magna Carta was established all the way back in the 1200s, but this is going to carry over even to this colonist. English liberty, that king was subject to the rule of law and that all persons should enjoy security of person and property, is going to be a central theme to these colonists because though they are leaving England proper, they want to be Englishmen and have Englishman rights. Embodied in the common law, as serfdom slowly disappeared in the number of English considered firstborn, this will expand in the colonies as now there's a new economic opportunity. I can work the land, I can have my own property, I don't have to be stuck in the old model of the old world. However, during all this, there's going to be the English Civil War. In the 1640s, England erupted in the Civil War, struggle between Parliament and the Stuart monarchs. Charles II was executed in 1649, and Oliver Cromwell will rule as dictator for a decade before he died. There'll be no monarch, but a dictator for a decade in England. And this is going to have drastic effects where basically the colonies are not going to be looked at for about a decade. About in 1660, Charles II will assume the throne again. He'll be invited back, though his father was beheaded. I don't know why you would come back, but he does. I think it actually was Charles I was executed. Charles II assumed the throne. But it stimulated intense discussions of liberty, authority, and what it meant to be a free Englishman. Now, religion, politics, and freedom too. Freedom took on a new meaning. The Levelers' history, first democratic political movement, proposed a written constitution, though it never came to full fruition. The Civil War in English America divided the colonies. Some of Anne Hutchinson's followers become Quakers, saying we will not fight in a war. We're going to be pacifists. And those with the Quakers will be what will be the modern day, think of like Pennsylvania, where people don't believe in violence. Civil War in Maryland, the plundering time in 1649. Now, because this was between the Stuarts and Parliament. Parliament was more Protestant. The Stuarts were Catholic. They're going to have now Catholics attacked in Maryland that was supposed to be a religious freedom area. You're going to have the Act Concerning Religion, Maryland Toleration Act, that technically was supposed to open freedom for all. But the reality is Protestants are going to move in and take the role of persecuting Catholics to some degree in that colony. Now, Cromwell and the Empire, aggressive military expansion, Ireland, Catholics, Jamaica. He's going to kick Catholics out of Ireland. They're going to colonize Jamaica. Several colonies will now in the Atlantic. The British or the English colony system or expansion is definitely in full swing. The seeds for the development of plantation societies were already there as well in Jamaica and the South. But the point as we get to here at the end of chapter 2, and though this has been a very fast and furious lecture here, is you're going to start to see the colonies now. As there's changes in England, you're going to see changes reflected in the colonies. The religious movements, yes, they were there, but they're going to be put aside because you got to have money at the end of the day. Yeah, you have your city on the hill, but if you don't have money, you don't have food, you're going to die. And you can't have a society that is so rigid that no one's going to want to move there. You're not going to have children. Those children, if they do have them, they're going to leave because they don't want that future. At the end of the day, though, these ideas of English liberty are going to filter through, and people are going to start to change in the colonies. The colonies will start to adapt more and more as the time goes. This concludes chapter 2. Have a great day.